introduce our featured modeler for this evening, Bob Schneider. Bob is retired. He came to me, I found him through the Association of Professional Model Builders. I'm really impressed with this organization, and I truly believe that an awful lot of model railroaders that are coming along in the hobby are developing the skills and could make a career out of being a professional model builder. So Bob, thank you so much for taking the time to be with us tonight. I really do appreciate it. And I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Well, I'm very impressed with what I've been seeing. I've learned a lot about model railroading. You know, I had a Markland HO kit when I was very young, and I still have it somewhere, but I don't think it works anymore. The engine's probably dead. But I've always liked miniature stuff, and I've always liked, I built lots of kit bashing stuff when I was like 7. And I'd burn a few, you know, blow up a few plastic models out in the backyard, things like that. But I got interested in model making as a career when there's a class offered, or as a complete AS degree through a local college. And their coursework covered scale architectural models, and some product modeling, you know, like telephones at the time. This is back in '76 when I first saw this. And they also, the big thrust though was piping models for like nuclear power plants, or power, you know, steam power plants of any kind, coal, process piping for refineries and things like that. And so I checked that out and signed up for the class, and we had to do first a scale model of a house. We had to either design the house or find plans and build a model of the house on a 2 by 3 square foot wood base, and do the landscaping and things like that. And we did first white cardboard models, then we did you know, went into our actual model we had to build trees also. You had to have a selection of 5 different kinds of trees on it. And after that, it got into heavy precision type modeling with cutting acrylic on a table saw, mitering the corners of all these pieces and gluing it together so it would be a cube. And you had to have a hole drilled on one side that was plus or minus 5 thousandths from the edge. And, you know, the dimensioning was very, the tolerances were very tight. And then you had to paint it 3 times, 3 different colors on each cube. So you had to split it up each way. And then at that point, that's when I ran my thumb into the table saw. I was the first student in the class to actually get damaged. And I survived that. My thumb is very functional and everything. But that was very traumatic. I got over it though. After that, the next, that's be about a year later, we started in on process modeling, the piping, and you could buy all these kits with all this plastistruct H columns and I beams and tank, well, hemispherical tank ends and things like that. You could buy all this stuff, or you could buy this kit to do this, a common modeling kit for let's see, three tanks a column, a couple pumps in it, and a pipe raceway. And before I even I finished that class, but then before I started doing all the drafting and engineering classes that go along with it, I was hired out. Got a job at Bechtel Engineering in San Francisco, where I started doing. I was on one project. I was a Hope Creek nuclear power plant. This model was going on concurrently as the build was going on in New Jersey. Model bases, I think there's like 50 model bases that were 2 by 3 foot basic size. And and they would stack it up to make, so that they could assemble the whole model, and it would be about 8 feet tall. And it was a half-inch scale to a foot, or half inch to a 1 foot scale. They did some models that were 3/4 of an inch to a foot. And you imagine how big those would be. After a while, though, you start seeing pipes in your mind or when your dreams, and it got to be kind of boring. So I did that for about 2.5 years, and I decided I wanted to go back and finish my coursework and look at doing other stuff. And about that time, Star Wars came out, and there was an awful lot of movie hype, and how the models were built for all these ships and the props and everything. It got me interested in that, but it didn't mean that I was going to get into it, because it's pretty difficult. You basically have to live on the set and make the models, and then they come along and say, "Oh, we're not using that. We're going in a different direction after you've spent, I don't know, 150 hours on it." But what I did find was a job at a place called the Model Studio in San Jose. And at this time, I'd say it was about 78. About this time, there was a lot of product model going on for the computer industry. We were building complete model sets, full scale, of keyboards with a monitor in the front and a mouse. Maybe the mouse came a little bit later, but there was always some kind of tactile interface thing. We did those. We worked on, and we did about, I'd say, 20 different models a year of just the computer workstations. Sometimes they're computer mainframes, and they're all made out of acrylic plastic or ABS plastic, all from scratch, from stock. Sometimes we'd start off with an inch thick slab of material and machine out vents into it. And if you can imagine looking at your computer, your laptop, or whatever computer you're using right now, if you had to make a model of that, you have all those keys that have to be put in place, and some of them were a lot more sculptural then. Like you think of an IBM Selectric keyboard or a typewriter, they had a lot more shape to them. So we had to make all those buttons or all those keys, and then we had to put rub downs for the graphics on them. Also at that time, we got into hot and heavy with Atari and Coleco and other brands of video games that were popular at the time. And then about 2 years later, it was phones and other communication devices. And then all of a sudden it became medical equipment was really popular. So we just kind of moved along with this. At this time, rapid prototyping, came online in about 81, I think. Maybe 82, and they were telling us, "Oh, model makers are going to go, they're going to be extinct after a while, because it's just going to take over everything." Well, all it did was give us another tool to work with. We could take the rapid prototype part, but we still had to finish it out and to paint it and make it look like, pretty. So that's been said several times. I've moved jobs from the product model industry. I've worked in automotive, where we did automotive interiors. I helped other people do clay models of the exteriors and things like that. If you can think of, like, you get into a car and you'll see the visors up above, they had to be modeled. The floor consoles, I didn't do any of the dash work, but I did do garage door openers, things like this. And then we got into car seating in that industry. I also, as the automotive industry can be kind of up and down too, so there's always a lot of pressure to perform for that. And we had a lot of car shows that we had to enter stuff into. And those were intensive builds where you'd have maybe 10 people working on a project that's going to go into a car show, and you have to worry about people coming in and touching and ripping knobs off and things like that. You have to make it robust. After about, let's see, 7 years at that place, in 1997, I left. It became a brewer at a small pub in my town, just because I was so burned out on modeling. And that lasted about a year before it went under due to the business and the people running the restaurant side of it. They didn't really have it together so I made good beer. That was fun. But after that, I had to get back to real work. And so I joined Whirlpool Corporation, where I worked for about 21 years, doing full-size scale, not scale mock-ups, full-size models of refrigerators, stand mixers, ovens, ranges, dishwashers, all the dishwasher parts inside. That was, if you can think of building a refrigerator, if you open up a refrigerator and look at all the pieces inside of it, sometimes we would build those from scratch, from the frame of the refrigerator, because you can't just go get cheap metal and foam it up like they do. We would have to build the interiors up and glue them together, finish them out. If you're reaching inside a refrigerator and sanding along the inside surface there, because when you light these things up, you'll see all the sanding marks and everything. So all I can say was some of those projects we had spent $200,000 on one refrigerator. We had outsourced to parts. Sometimes it'd be the clear parts, the bins. We'd outsource. Sometimes we'd have 4 or 5 different companies building parts for us, and then they'd all come in, and we had to make sure that they would fit in place. Then you have this model built up. Usually we'd have lighting, LED lighting. We couldn't go too fancy on the lighting because we had to stay with what was, production available. Some of the concept models we did were pushing the envelope on lighting and features inside a refrigerator, but you have this model built up, and then it has to get shipped around the country, and you have to worry about, is it going to see temperatures over 200 degrees? Is it going to see temperature down to 0 degrees? You can imagine these models going on the back of a truck across the country to San Diego, over the Rockies and everything like that. Are they going to get there in one piece? And then it gets shipped to the next location, which might be in Dallas, Texas, or Florida, or New York City, depending on where they would do either shows or unveilings or public research, where they bring in customers or the general public and say, what do you think of this? Do you like this feature? Do you like any of these features? Or what would you suggest we do different? Some of our models had touch sensors on them for like a control panel. We had to make the control panels on like a washer front that you could actually touch, and it would turn on the lights. Usually they wouldn't turn on the motor and rotate, but it would definitely go through lighting features. Some of those were pretty sensitive to touch or atmospheric conditions or whatever. We had issues with that occasionally. But usually the materials we were using were either like rapid prototype parts, but we would machine an awful lot of these pieces from urethane foam of different densities. They would be anywhere from like a 10-pound foam up to a 45-pound foam, which means a cubic block, square foot or cubic foot block. That's the density of it, how much it weighs. Like a 45-pound is a pretty hefty chunk of material. But we would machine these on a slab, 4-inch thick slab on a 5x8 CNC routers, or we had 2 other mills. And we had very nice facility. There was never enough room. We were always pushing things out of the way to do our final assemblies of these products. I can bring up some pictures and try to share my screen on that if, let's see. Oops. I'm a newbie at Zoom, so. Here am
Don't
I.
worry.
So can anybody see this interior?
No.
Nope,
Let
just
me
you.
see. Just me. How about that? Can you see that now?
There we
Yes.
go. KitchenAid.
There.
Yeah.
Yes.
So Whirlpool was KitchenAid, Maytag, Genair, and a couple other, European brands, Indian brand, Central Asian and Eastern Asian and South America, and also Mexico, and even I think Inglis in Canada. I think that was one of the brands. Here you can see this ring piece right here. That is a dryer front. It's like a ring that goes on a door, and that was machined from a 1.5 inch thick piece of ABS acrylic. I mean ABS plastic. So it's maybe a 1/4 inch thick, but if it's machined out of a solid, you can imagine how many chips there were. There wasn't much left of the material after we machined that piece out. You can see we have some pretty good lighting in there, nice epoxy floors. This cabinet right here had an excellent selection of screws, things like that. We had work carts like this that we could stack parts on as they were in different phases of construction. We'd have to sand, and we'd use automotive paints, refinish paints, primers and things like that to get everything finished out correctly. And off to the right here, there's a big walk-in spray booth that you could drive a car into, and complete paint mixing bank with all these cans that would be on auto rotate to keep them fresh. I'm going to go to another picture. No, I'll do that. So this was a mock-up it's a standalone kitchen console. It had everything in it. It had refrigeration.
I don't see the new
You
picture.
don't see that either? Okay.
I don't see the new picture.
Let's see if
I'm
I can.
still
Okay,
seeing.
so let me walk you through it. Stop sharing. When you hit share this time, when you start sharing,
Yeah.
Share the upper left image. The upper left is your desktop. The other ones are applications, and sometimes you share a picture, you only share the one picture. When you open the next one, we don't see it. If you open the upper left screen, that's your desktop, and we'll see what you see. So share, click on the upper left and then share that.
Okay, there's my desktop. You see it?
It's taking a second, I think, because of bandwidth. There we go. Yep, we're seeing your
Yeah,
desktop.
Pay no attention to the files on the side. Do you see
There
this?
you go. Yep, perfect.
Yep.
Okay, this was a mock-up that was built. The designers were from our design center in Italy, so we had a lot of cultural communication issues occasionally, but it was a real fun build. These lit bins on the side were the refrigeration bins. Down here, there was access, and a dishwasher was here. This is like a large serving table with a cooled center, I don't know, tray. This right here was, I'll show another picture of it soon. There's a dishwasher at this end, and then there was a small cook stove and a sink. And in here, there is a giant walk. And this thing standing up was supposed to be a water curtain to where they would drag the smoke through and the curtain would catch the smoke particles. This is totally, pie in the sky, dreaming stuff like that. Also at the bottom, I had to install, I had fiber optic lighting in there, and in bright conditions, you couldn't see it. So I had to have a neon tube made up for that. And then eventually it was replaced with LED lighting, which was brighter than the neon tube, but it wasn't as nicely blended as the neon was. So this got put up in the office, the CEO's office, for about 2 or 3 years, and then I'm sure it got scrapped somewhere. Let's see the next picture. So there's the detail. This is that giant walk, and that's the column. This whole thing could collapse down. Theoretically, none of it did at the time. It was just a static model. This is some of the equipment that we use. These are 2 RP machines. They're object printers. They're different ages. This one's brand new. It could print in multiple colors and densities. So it could be a flexible material, or it could be a really hard material, or it could be clear. This one would just do clear and grays. They're very high end. They're like, $100,000 and $200,000 machines. Very high resolution on them if you wanted to. Some of the designers would put in a request and they'd make their part and get it, and they'd say, oh, it doesn't fit, so they'd put in the next request the next day and make another part for it, or we'd have to make another part. Be anything from a thimble size to I think bigger than a bread box, 200 millimeters or something like that. This right here, this blue and white cabinet, is it's a combination CO2 laser, and I'm not sure what the other kind is, but it was you could etch metal, you couldn't cut metal, but you could do lots of other materials, plastics and wood and leather and things like that. So, at first when we got it, we didn't really know what we'd use it for, except one of the guys that recommended it said, you'll use it for everything. Pretty soon we were using it for making just simple fixtures to create proper spacing between objects. It was very handy, and it makes a beautiful, nice acrylic pieces come out with clear edges and everything. It's a very handy machine. This one is another project that I worked on separately. It was a beer making machine that Whirlpool decided to sponsor. It was kind of like a contest to see who could come up with a business plan. Then my team won, so they gave us money, like $50,000 to carry it to one step, and then we got $3 million to carry it to the next step, which was actual production. And it's called a Vessi. What you see on top here with the bottle is actually the bottling unit that goes with it. And it was one of those things where I got to use my skills as a model maker and as a brewer. And it was a very fun project that lasted about 2 years. And then let's make it 4 years. And then they decided to sell it off because somebody didn't like that Whirlpool was getting into beer making or alcohol. And another thing here is this is a full scale. It's a cabin. It's 16 feet by 20 feet by 24 feet tall, I think, 2 stories. I cut the timber frame bents and assembled it, and then put the roof on, and then I started doing this what they call cordwood construction, which is lengths of wood, usually a pine or a cedar, and you'd lay it up with a mortar in the wall there. The logs were 11.5 inches wide. They're usually that wide or 16 inches wide. And it's a very thermodynamic, it holds the heat on the inside and protects it on the outside, and it doesn't rot because the wood can breathe better. It's a cabin that I started about 2000, and it's still not built, and here we are 20 years later. I've got to do the back top 4 feet on the backside. I think that's it about me as far as what I've got going. I'm going to stop sharing. And so being a model maker, as you know, you're always looking for opportunities for new techniques, new materials to use. That's one of the things that the APMM was instrumental on. We meet with vendors at these conferences. We would talk to, I don't know, I'd talk to 40 different people and come up with new things that I could bring back to the shop and justify my trip out to Seattle, Washington, or something like that. The APMM has a program for students, where they're trying to bring students on board, and we'll mentor, we'll do model making contests for them, scholarships and things like that. Jim, what did you think of this last conference? Was it pretty eye-opening for you, or?
Yeah, it was, no question about it. The people that I have met have been very impressive, and one of the main reasons that I am so enthusiastic about the APMM is because of the mentoring capabilities that I see for modelers coming from that organization. And the other reason is I believe that model railroaders have the talent to become professionals in the organization. So I look at it from both an employment capability standpoint for younger model railroaders, and I look at it as a mentoring proposition for possibly more advanced model railroaders.
Sure. So they might start off with model railroading and then say, well, I've made this kit. Like, I know a lot of you here have kits that you build and sell, or probably you make parts and you made a mold, so you have extra parts, you can sell them off to other people. At this conference, we met quite a few people, young folks that were doing just that. I think at your last New Tracks, you had some pretty interesting guys on that too.
Yeah, we had 3 modelers come and talk about what they do, and that was I guess my first step of trying to get the association interested in model railroaders as potential career professional model builders.
Yeah. So I had a 35-year career doing models. I've done okay. I thought I did pretty well at it. Some people will get paid a lot more. They might even go into computer rendering or things like that, and they get paid $10,000 for a rendering, as we heard from my ex-roommate, Jeff there. There's lots of avenues, lots of approaches to model making, and from model making, there's lots of directions to go. I'm just amazed when I go onto YouTube and I see how many people are putting their builds on there, and how many people have channels where they're building video game scenes or movie scenes, dioramas and things like that. Everything from real creepy monster stuff to anime kind of things, and it's just amazing what's out there and how much information's out there. As far as in sharing materials, that's another thing that the APMM has brought forth. There were several material vendors at conferences usually, lots of casting materials, the basic materials like Abo modulum that was put out by Aline. I can remember McCausey Lumber, they're a big supplier of that, which is, you know, again, they're huge, thick slabs, but for somebody that was doing a big build and they wanted to do a topographical representation of a real situation, you might be able to, you could machine the surface of the contours that you wanted and have a very accurate representation of a certain scene. I don't know. I'm guessing at this, but I know you could, because I know a lot of architectural models are based off of the information that they get that match the actual sites that they're going to be, that the contractors or the developers want to use. As far as what, you know, I was thinking about tips and techniques that I do. I've always been a big proponent for being able to break things down if I need to repair it. So I'm always thinking of assembly and disassembly later on down the road. And I like to have double-sided tapes that I can kind of pry pieces off if I need to get back inside things. Another glue I use that I didn't see anybody mention was Goop, which is available in any hardware store. It sets up kind of like a harder rubber cement or like silicone glue. It's what it feels like, but you apply it and it oozes out too far, you can let it dry and rub it off or just peel it off. And it doesn't mar the finish or anything like that. It doesn't permanently damage the surface. So it's easy to disassemble later on if you need to. It's great stuff. It comes in all kinds of, you can buy it from, they call it plumber's goop, whatever. I just get the tube of glue that has the spout on it, that comes with the spout, because some of them don't. The different types of double-sided tape that we used some very thin stuff, and I can't give you any brand names because I retired now, so I don't have access to all the information that I used to. But Dave's Tapes, I think, was one of the companies that we used to buy a lot of double-sided tape from. So there's, and then we used Loctite glues, but we used the commercial variety of Loctite. 701 was a real thin one, and 711 was a thicker, not a gel, but it was a thicker version of it. Then there's stuff called the Black Max, and I think that's number 736, which is like a very tough super glue, and it's black. Sometimes that comes in handy for when you don't want a clear glue joint, you want black, fills in nicely. But it is a very tough glue to use, very durable. And like I said, our models might be seeing 200 degrees or, you know, anywhere from like 0 to 200 degrees temperature ranges. So we had to build for problems like that. So any questions?
Would you recommend a career in model building?
It was, you know, it was a good career for me. I haven't done any models by myself at home since then, because I kind of like got home and it's like, I'm tired of working on precision stuff. I'll go work on my cordwood cabin. But now that I'm retired, I'm thinking, yeah, maybe I'll start doing some of that. I was very interested when I first started on doing any kind of scale models. And I do recommend it because I think there are so many avenues. You might start off as a model maker. You might sand parts for 5 years or something like that, or you might do the finishing and the painting and everything like that, assemble it. And you might find that all of a sudden there's an opening in CNC training, so you might start machining those parts. Those get into be some very technical positions with a lot of computer time, and some people love that kind of stuff. I like to make one-off stuff, so I love having CAD available and checking assemblies and things like that with data that we would get in. But I'm not a CNC machinist. I always did good work on the CNC, but I'm not going to sit there and babysit a machine for forever. So there's so many ways you can specialize with model making. You can go into rapid prototyping side of it. You can do the digital manipulation of all the different files that come in, the computer files. It covers a pretty broad spectrum skill sets. You know, you could be a carpenter and get into model making. You could be a furniture maker. I think we had somebody like that. Somebody that does ceramic type stuff might find it interesting to get into model making. Or there's also a whole nother set of engineering prototyping stuff, which is can be very technical and interesting to people. Being working with scientific instruments like Greg Cleese, or yeah, he works for John Hopkins University, and he's in charge of their labs. And some of his multi-million-dollar equipment that he works with is pretty sophisticated, you know, way beyond what I would consider, but it's the range is, you can go several different ways. So there's also doll furniture. You've seen that. Ship models. Well, we also had a tour of the the patent models, patent model museum. They don't use them as much, but there's the people that build these models for doing prove outs of different iterations of prototypes. Like I said, that can be a very technical side. There's a lot to appeal to anybody who likes building things, who likes seeing something go from concept to, you know, either fruition, or whether it's like several different steps along the way, or it's just I made this model, here it is, it's done, you take it and pay me for it. There's people that are self-employed doing this. There are people that work in small job shops that might have 14, 15 employees or something like that, where different skills. And then there's big corporate shops like when I worked at Whirlpool or Johnson Controls or Bechtel Engineering. They're, you know, they employed probably a couple hundred model makers at one time. So yes, I highly recommend model making as a career. And especially if you get to do railroad models, I think that's really cool too. Anything else?
I have a question.
Yes.
What about can you describe what a career with a would happen? I mean, obviously, you got the sort of like the apprentice, and then the journeyman, and the
Yeah.
craftsman. How does that sort of kind of work through someone's career?
Some places offered journey type, you know, the journeyman type stuff. Usually those were more like the tool and die and prototyping machinist positions. We have a guy at Whirlpool, one of our model makers that came in, that is proven to be very skilled at anything you throw at him. He was running the lasers and those object machines, and also a UV ink printer. And he came from a art class background. nothing related to model making at all. He just came in and we saw his stuff. He saw he was very detail oriented. Asked him about computers, what does he do? And he says, oh, I just jump in and start touching keys and things happen. So it takes somebody with an open mind, willing to experiment, and pressure. There's a lot of pressure sometimes, but they come from all different directions. Like I said, you could be carpenters, as long as your attention to detail is good. If you're a CNC machinist or tool and die maker, you're going to be disappointed, I think, because things are done good enough to get the job done, whereas you're not going to be sitting there polishing one tool for 2 weeks on end. It's a lot faster turnaround and a lot more interesting projects, varied products or projects to go along. Tool and die is a tough job. So I'm saying that the really high technical detailed stuff is almost too much. You need to be looser than that. If a tool and die guy came into the shop, but he also did furniture at home, or rebuilt a camper or something like that, and he had good pictures of it, that's somebody I would consider for a model making position. We have, a lot of women come into this too, because I'm not going to say that they're detail oriented, but they come from maybe a slightly different perspective. And fabric, there's fabric designers that come into, if you want to make a Nike shoe, you're going to have maybe 2 or 3 different types of skill sets on there. You have somebody who does casting, somebody who does sewing, and then somebody who's going to assemble the shoe and maybe a little bit of finishing on it. But they're going to want to be able to put the shoe on and see how it feels generally. So it has to be durable. But those are all model makers, basically. And the APMM, I think, it's the only professional worldwide association right now that's going on that we know of. But there are universities. The ones in the UK seem to be really coming on strong now. There's a couple in the US, Bemidji State and NWTC, Northwest Technical Center, which is in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I think they're still going strong. There might be other colleges that I'm not familiar with, but there are schools to go to for this. And then there are some art schools that will kind of visit model making. Car designers start off building cars, a scale car, and they might say, I much prefer making the scale model car than actually doing all the artwork, the drawings and everything like that. And so they might, I've known a couple that have stayed in the model making side of it rather than go on to a full blown car designer. Anything else? That answer it?
This is John Mick. I wonder if you have any comments about model making in either movies or at Disney.
We went on a tour of the Disney studios down in Orlando. They outsource a lot of their modeling and their exhibits and their animatronic stuff. The only stuff that they had going on there were repairs. And we were kind of disappointed to see that. So then, we thought, oh, we're going to get a tour of Disney, and it ended up being the biggest thing was their laundry facility that they showed us. We were kind of, we got to go in the backgrounds of some of the rides and things like that. But I've known a few people who have worked in Los Angeles at the Disney Studios, and they worked on like a big fairgrounds, very detailed with a Ferris wheel and all the different arcade things. And it was a scale model, worked on it for about a year. and it got shelved somewhere. So I know that they probably do some site planning with models, but they're outsourced to other companies for the bigger stuff, the main stuff. One of the other highlights was Ripley's Believe It or Not Museum. I didn't get to go on that tour, but they had, if you've been to Ripley's, any of them, I think they have them worldwide. And so they have to copy some of their exhibits. So they might have a drawer full of bones and they say, well, we'll take this one, make a cast of it and use it in this exhibit in Europe or something like that. The shrunken heads, they probably made lots of those casts. That was from what I heard, that was a very fun tour. I wish I'd done on more of that. I'm probably digressing now. Movie stuff. I've had friends that worked on, let's see, everything from the Flintstones movies, Howard the Duck, so, some of the Star Wars movies. I've worked on some submarine models very briefly in a movie that was called Alias, not Alias, The Abyss, which, had 3 working submarines that had to be built in scale. They were about 4 feet long. So the mannequins were about the size of a G.I. Joe. And they had to work underwater and they were radio controlled. So that was a lot of testing and very high powered radio control equipment that the FCC was chasing them down. In residential sections, they had the radar trucks going around trying to pick up their signals. But if you look at those models in the Abyss, that was a real fun project. I wish I was able to continue on, but I was, while my boss was working on some of that stuff, I had to take over all the other projects in the main shop. But there is an awful lot of CGI stuff that's going on in the computer graphics. It's kind of taking over some of scale models in movies, but I still hear that there's quite a bit more going on, or it's still there. We've had a few people come on and talk about how the industry is changing, but they're hanging on, and they've had to look for work outside of the movie industry. So it's a lot of fun to do that, and it sounds interesting. But like I said, you're basically living on the set. You might be making a giant swimming whale and spend months on it, and then it gets used for, I don't know, 20 seconds in a film. You usually get paid for this kind of stuff, but not as fulfilling that I would think it would be. And I don't know if there are any schools for that. I'm sure you could find something in I forget the name of the colleges in LA, but there's a few there that did screen type or acting and also set building and things like that.
Bob, I know that the association offers positions. I've seen some of the positions that have been offered on their bulletin boards and so forth as part of the association. But if a person was interested in trying to break in to become a model builder, you got any suggestions besides the association?
Besides the association, I'd look at local modeling groups, clubs and things like that. If you're trying to get into it, most of you belong to some modeling or railroading group, right? And you bounce ideas off of each other, or you help each other with your build, and then they help you. That's one way to build up a infrastructure, or a friend base that you can talk to, and possibly find more avenues. in the, I don't know if in the trade magazines and the model railroading magazines or the screen magazines, there probably are. I know there are several magazines about just makeup and movie props, and they probably have ads in there. You know, I guess I would just say, I would say build stuff, take pictures of it, good pictures, build up a portfolio, and start sharing it with friends, family, any acquaintances and things like that, saying, hey, if you know anybody that's looking for something, you know, built up, like a museum. I didn't even go into museum models. There's a ton of those too. You know, a lot of museums will look for people to build a small scale model of a, say, a ship that comes into a port or something. I live in a Michigan here. I live in a off the Kalamazoo River, and there's lots of interesting little history, historical societies around this part of the state. Approaching somebody like that, say, hey, do you need a model of the ferry or some kind of famous ship that came into port? I could build that. I'll try to build that. And maybe you have to volunteer your time, but it's a step in that direction. And like I said, you got to take pictures of everything and try to document what you did. And if you had help, make sure that you say, well, this person helped me on this. And you don't want to say, I built the whole thing. And then they say, really? You know, when you're going out for job interviews, you can tell when somebody is overselling themselves. I'm not a really wealth of information on that because I usually just kind of fall into the jobs. And it was usually word of mouth. The only job that I really looked for was when I moved from California out to Michigan. My wife and I decided we liked this area. And so I hit up all the pattern making shops, the tool and die shops, and any manufacturer that might have a model shop. And I just send out brochures to everybody with my resume on it and some photos. And that's, it took me about 2 months of looking and interviews to get out here. But if you do a blanket, you know, and it's like sending a book off to a manuscript to be published. You have to send it out many places, and hopefully somebody will send back saying, yeah, we like your book, and they'll publish it.
We have a question from YouTube.
Yes.
Kirk Butcher. Do you have any advice on how to improve the hobby in building a train layout?
Since I'm not a real big model train person or model railroader, I would say I'd talk to you guys first. To do layouts, I was thinking about this earlier. It's like if I was going to build a layout, first you got to think of what space you have and what scale you're working with. And then what do you like? What train eras do you like? Do you want to go several different versions, you know? And layouts, they always got to be, if you look at towns, they got to be on rectilinear layouts generally, but there's always some free form there where if you look at Google Maps, you'll see how some towns are laid out and they're never perfect. You know, even north, and what they said was true north, and then it varies a little bit. There's one street that goes off 5 degrees from north. You got to have a blend of natural lines and compass lines, you know. And then what do you want to see in there? Do you want to see bridges? Do you want to see heavy freight yard activity? Maybe industry, or you don't want to have a train going through a residential section. That wouldn't look too good. Usually you want something interesting. I hope that helps.
Anybody else have any questions for Bob? Bob, I want to thank you so very much for your time today and for joining us. I really do appreciate it. You
Sure.
really been enlightening about the hobby and particularly about not just the hobby, but the professional aspects of what's involved with being a professional model builder. And I really do appreciate you taking the time today.
Well, thanks. I've learned a lot, and I'll probably be talking to some of you guys at some point when I get this bug up my behind. Okay.
That sounds great. We'll look forward to it. Thanks again so very
Thank you.
much.